So on number 32, you have tangent squared of 7 pi over 15 minus secant squared of 7 pi over 15 plus 3. One thing you need to know is your Pythagorean identities, and I'll have those on the test for you. So sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. Tangent squared plus 1 equals secant squared, and 1 plus cotangent squared equals cosecant squared, right? So I know that tangent squared minus secant squared, tangent and secant have a relationship in here. So if I were to subtract secant squared over, so tangent squared minus secant squared, and then I were to subtract the 1 over, then I would see the tangent squared minus secant squared of any angle is negative 1. So all of this right here is just negative 1. Plus 3, the final answer is 2. The clue that I didn't expect you to use the unit circle to figure this out is that it was 7 pi over 15, and that's not on the unit circle. So tangent squared, secant squared, that's got a relationship. Use my Pythagorean identity and just rearrange and replace. Okay? Now, number 33, I'm going to work this out fully, and then I'm going to show you how we could have done it a little bit more simply. So pi over 3, I'm going to go to pi over 3 right here, and I'm going to go to sine, and I'm going to square it. So square root of 3 over 2 squared. So square root of 3 over 2 squared plus cosine of pi over 3 squared, so 1/2 squared, over cotangent of pi over 3. So cotangent is, well, if tangent is y over x, sine over cosine, then cotangent is x over y. So we should know by now that the 2 simplify out, so it's 1 divided by the square root of 3. So I'm just going to leave it like that for right now. Times, and then I'm going to simplify, or I'm going to multiply by these. Cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2, and sine of pi over 3 is square root of 3 over 2. So first I'm going to deal with this up here. Square root of 3 over 2 squared is 3/4, and then 1/2 squared is 1/4. 3/4 plus 1/4 is 4/4, so that's 1 over 1 over the square root of 3 times 1/2 over the square root of 3 over 2. When I multiply fractions, I multiply straight across, so I've got 1 times 1/2, that's 1/2. When I multiply these two, the square roots cancel out, and I'm just left with 1/2, and 1/2 divided by 1/2 is 1. The final answer is 1. But here's how I could have gotten that faster if I'd used my identities. Sine squared plus cosine squared of anything is 1. So I've got 1 over cotangent of pi over 3 times, I could leave it like this, and I could deal with, well, here's one way. I'm going to do this a couple ways. Because it's all depending on what you see. So if you thought, well, that's 1 over cotangent, and thought, well, that's, and then cosine divided by sine is cotangent, then you could have seen, well, those simplify each other out. Or you could have seen maybe that it's 1 over, this is 1 over cotangent, which is the same thing as tangent. So tangent of pi over 3, all of this, times cosine of pi over 3 divided by sine of pi over 3. But then recognize that tangent is sine over cosine times cosine over sine. And then you can see that those simplify each other out, and you're left with 1 again. So either way that you see this, you could work it out using the unit circle. You could work it out using different identities, and you'll get to the same spot. Okay? Or you could have worked it like to this spot and then plugged in the things that you know. So like if you just replace one thing with an identity, it's still making it faster than having to work it all out. So far 2 and 1. Number 34, it says secant of 5 pi over 6 times cosine of 5 pi over 6 times tangent of 5 pi over 6. Like I said, I'm going to work it all out using the unit circle, and then I'm going to work it out using what I know. So secant of 5 pi over 6. So here's 5 pi over 6. Secant's the reciprocal of cosine. So if negative square root of 3 over 2 is cosine, then secant is negative 2 over the square root of 3. And yes, I could rationalize, but I'm going to leave it like that right now. Cosine of 5 pi over 6 is negative square root of 3 over 2. And tangent of 5 pi over 6 is sine over cosine. So it's negative 1 over the square root of 3. As far as the first two terms go, they simplify each other out. A negative times a negative, and then the 2's and the square root of 3's, right? So my final answer is going to be negative square root of 3 over 3 when I rationalize that. But I could have known that secant and cosine are just reciprocals of each other. So I could have just replaced secant. So just remember, secant of theta is 1 over cosine of theta. So I could have thought of that as 1 over cosine of 5 pi over 6 times cosine of 5 pi over 6. In which case, those two simplify each other out, and I was just left with tangent of 5 pi over 6. And that's my answer. So, number 35. That only works. You can only simplify things if they have the same angles. These all have the same angles, so I could look for stuff like that. This has the same angles, so I can use the identities. None of these angles are the same, which means I'm going to have to just use my unit circle. Okay? Okay, 8 pi over 3 is outside of one rotation, which means I need to subtract one rotation. So, I'm going to take 8 pi over 3 and subtract 2 pi. 2 pi is the same thing as 6/3, so that's 2 pi over 3. So that might as well be tangent of 2 pi over 3. Alright, 2/3 pi is right here. 2/3 tangent is sine over cosine. So that's square root of 3 over negative 1 or negative square root of 3 times cosine of 3 pi. So if this is pi, if this is 0, this is pi, this is 2 pi, so it's pi, 2 pi, 3 pi is just right here. Or again, you can take 3 pi and subtract 2 pi, and you're left with pi. So 3 pi might as well just be pi. And cosine of pi, cosine is the x value, that's negative 1. Plus sine of 11 pi over 6. 11 pi over 6 is right here. Sine is the y value, so negative 1/2 times, and then secant of 3 pi over 4. So 3/4 pi is right here. Secant's the reciprocal of cosine. So the reciprocal of negative square root of 2 over 2 is negative 2 over the square root of 2. So the reciprocal of negative square root of 2 over 2 is negative 2 over the square root of 2. If I rationalize them, then I'm just left with negative square root of 2. So this is negative square root of 2. So what I'm seeing is that I've got positive square root of 3, negative times negative is positive, plus the square root of 2 over 2, and common denominator would be 2. So my final answer is 2 square roots of 3 plus the square root of 2 all over 2. Number 36, it says find sine of pi over 2 minus theta given secant. Well, sine of pi over 2 minus theta is cosine. So if they're asking me to find cosine, but they give me secant, then I know cosine could be, 3/4, because it's reciprocal of secant. So, there we go. I know technically I could put that in 2 different quadrants, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is, because I'm going to be more specific if I want multiple quadrants as an issue. Okay, for number 37, f of this 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 2, what I'm going to have to do is first I'm going to have to combine these angles. So I'm going to multiply by 2 on top and bottom. So I get 3 pi over 4 plus 2 pi over 4, that's f of 5 pi over 4. F is negative cosine, so that means negative cosine of 5 pi over 4. Cosine of 5 pi over 4, 5/4 pi, cosine is negative square root of 2 over 2. So it's negative square root of 2 over 2. Final answer, square root of 2 over 2. Number 38 is 3 times g of h of pi over 2. So first I'm going to find h of pi over 2. H of pi over 2 means negative pi over 2 divided by 3. Well, negative pi divided by 2 divided by 3 is the same thing as negative pi divided by 2 times 1/3, and that is negative pi over 6. So I'm actually finding h of pi over 2 is negative pi over 6, so I'm finding 3 times g of negative pi over 6. So g is 2 sine, so 3 times 2 sine of negative pi over 6. So sine of negative pi over 6, so if pi over 6 is right here, then negative pi over 6 is right here, rotate backwards 30 degrees. Sine is the y value. So I've got 3 times 2 times negative 1/2, and my final answer is going to be negative. Number 39. G of negative 7 pi over 6, so G is 2 sine. So that's 2 sine of negative 7 pi over 6. I'll go ahead and figure out that part. 7 6 pi is right here, so to go backwards 7 6 pi needs to go to right here. So it's asking me for 2 times the sine of that. So the sine of that is 1/2. So 2 times 1/2 is just 1 minus. Okay, so this is going to get funky. I'm going to do some colors over here. Negative 2 times h of f of h of 6 pi. So first let me figure out what h of 6 pi is. So h of 6 pi is negative 6 pi over 3, which means negative 2 pi. Okay? So this is negative 2 times h of f of negative 2 pi. So now I'm going to plug negative 2 pi into f. So f of negative 2 pi means negative cosine of negative 2 pi. Well, negative 2 pi just means go backwards. So this is going forwards 2 pi, going backwards 2 pi. I still have them in the same spot. Cosine is 1, so that's negative 1 because of the negative out front. So this is negative 2 h of f of negative 2 pi is negative 1. So then what I'm really finding is negative 2 times, well, negative 2 h of negative 1 equals negative 2 times h of negative 1, negative 1 divided by 3, which means that's a positive 1/3, which means my final answer is a negative 2/3. Well, for that piece, right? Sorry, I don't know if you saw that. So h of x is negative x divided by 3, so h of negative 1 means negative 1 divided by 3, so positive 1/3 times a negative 2, and that becomes a negative 2/3. So all of this is minus 2/3, which means the final answer is 1/3. Okay, Emily. Okay, guys, the 4th page is up there if you want to go ahead and, or it's going to be in a second. So the last page, I've just got to fill out the unit, use the unit circle. So if I don't finish it before the end of the period, then I'll post the picture. Okay, cosecant of 930 degrees. 930 degrees is outside of one rotation, so I'm going to subtract 360. Actually, I'm going to subtract 720 because I know 720 is 2 rotations, 360 plus 360, and that is 210. So I'm actually asking you for cosecant of 210. 210 degrees is right here. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so sine is negative 1/2, cosecant is negative 2. Oh, well, cosecant again. Well, there you go. Cosecant of 225. 225 degrees is right here. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, although it doesn't matter in this case. Negative square root of 2 over 2. You could think negative 2 divided by the square root of 2 and rationalize. And you get negative 2 root 2 over 2, which is negative root 2. Or you can just remember that negative square root of 2 over 2 is negative 1 over the square root of 2. Just did all of that outside of it. So when you flip negative square root of 2 over 2, you can think of it as negative 2 over the square root of 2, rationalize, and then you get negative 2 square root of 2, negative square root of 2, or square root of 2 times square root of 2 is 2, 2 simplify out, negative square root of 2. Or you can just remember that if this is the cosine, which is the same thing as that, then flipping this to get secant is just negative square root of 2. So either way, negative square root of 2. Secant of 7 pi over 2. So 7/2 is not on my unit circle, so I'm going to subtract some rotations. So I'm going to subtract 2 pi. 2 pi is in fact 4 halves, so 7 minus 4 is 3. So I'm actually looking at 3/2 pi. So I'm going to go to 3/2 pi, which is down here. Secant's the reciprocal of cosine. Cosine is 0, so this is undefined because 1 over 0 is undefined. All right, cotangent of negative pi over 2. So cotangent of negative pi over 2 means we're going to go backwards pi over 2, and cotangent is cosine over sine, yeah? If tangent is y over x, sine over cosine, then cotangent is cosine over sine, x over y. So we get 0 divided by negative 1, the answer is 0. On 44, negative 11 thirds is outside of the window, so I'm going to start adding a rotation since it's negative. So I'm going to add 2 pi. 2 pi is 6 thirds, so that's negative 5 thirds. That's enough. I know where that is. So I know where 5 thirds is 300 degrees. So I'm going to go backwards 300 degrees, and it puts me at 60. So then the question is, what is cosine of that? Cosine of 60 is a positive 1/2. Number 45, cotangent of negative 150 degrees. I really like cotangent, don't I? I guess just twice. Negative 150 degrees. So if 150 degrees is right here, that's positive at 150 degrees. Then negative 150 degrees is right here at 210. And I'm asking for cotangent. Cotangent is x over y. So that would be square root of 3 over 1. You could think of it as a negative, but either way, you end up with square root of 3. Tangent of 3 pi. So 3 pi, well here's 0, pi, 2 pi, 3 pi. So 3 pi is right here, or you can subtract a rotation. I'm looking for tangent. Tangent is sine over cosine. Tangent is y over x, so that's 0 over negative 1. So the answer is 0. Sine of negative 480 degrees. So what we're going to do is we're going to add rotation. So I'm going to say negative 480, and I'm going to add 360. That gives me negative 120 degrees. I know where that is. So if 120 degrees is right here, backwards 120 degrees is right here at 240. So when they ask me for sine of that, sine is the y value, and that is negative square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of 5 pi over 4. Cosine of 5 pi over 4 is, let me go to 5 pi over 4, and cosine is just the x. So negative square root of 2 over 2. 11 pi over 4. 11 fourths pi is not on my unit circle. You could go odds, because you know it says 1, 3, 5, 7. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. So I'm pretty sure that's that one. But if we did want to subtract rotations, then we could say 11 pi over 4 minus 2 pi. 2 pi is 8 fourths, and 11 minus 8 is 3. So 3 pi over 4. 3 fourths pi, I want cotangent. Cotangent is, it's not going to really matter. Either way, it's negative 1. It's x over y, so negative square root of 2 over the square root of 2. And we get negative 1. 14 thirds pi. 14 thirds is outside of one rotation, so I'm going to subtract 2 pi. 2 pi is 6 thirds. 14 minus 6 is 8 thirds. That's still out of one rotation. So I'm going to subtract it again. 8 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3, which is just 2 pi, is 2 pi over 3. So secant of 14 pi over 3 might as well be just secant of 2 pi over 3. So 2 pi over 3 is right here, and they're asking me for secant. Secant's the reciprocal of cosine, so if cosine is negative 1/2, then secant is negative 2. 13 fourths pi. So 13 fourths pi is outside of one rotation. So 13 fourths minus 2 pi, which is 8 fourths, is 5 pi over 4. So when they ask me to find cosecant of that, they're asking me to find cosecant basically of 5 pi over 4. 5 fourths pi is right here. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Either way, it's negative square root of 2 or 2. When you do the reciprocal of that, you get negative square root of 2. Negative 10 thirds pi. So I'm going to take negative 10 thirds pi, and I'm going to add a rotation because it's negative. Negative 10 thirds is 6 thirds, so that's negative 4 thirds, and I know where that is. So if this is 4 thirds right here, that's positive 240 degrees, then backwards 240 degrees puts me at 120. So I'm at this coordinate point right here. I want cosecant, which is reciprocal of sine. So if sine is square root of 3 over 2, then this is 2 over the square root of 3, which simplifies or rationalizes to 2 root 3 over 3. 53, cotangent of negative pi over 2. So if I go negative pi over 2, did I already do that? That's already number 43. I'm not going to worry about that. And then cotangent of negative 2 pi. Heck yeah. Repeat itself a lot. Okay, if I go backwards 2 pi, then it puts me back at the original. Cotangent is cosine over sine. So cotangent of this is 1 over 0, x over y, and that is undefined. And secant of 765 degrees, so less 1. 765 degrees minus 360 is 405 degrees. 405 degrees minus 360 is 45 degrees. So they're really just asking me for the secant of 45 degrees, or in essence. The reciprocal of cosine at 45 degrees is going to be the square root of 2. And there we go.